Welcome to Global Connections with Robert Siegel, Navigating the New Normal, presented by the American Friends of Rabin Medical Center. Our monthly Leaders Forum addresses vital issues facing society and the economy, real estate and technology, medicine and science. My name is Dr. Joshua Plout. I'm the Executive Director of American Friends of Rabin Medical Center, AFRMC, a 501c3 National American Charitable Organization based in New York City. We at AFRMC represent Israel's premier hospital, Rabin Medical Center in Petah Tikva in Greater Tel Aviv, the leading institution named in honor of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. The hospital is a model of coexistence. It serves 1 million patients annually from all ethnic and religious backgrounds with the same compassionate care. And now, during this time of war, the hospital is a front line of Israel's defenses, treats the many wounded Israeli soldiers and civilian casualties. We remain in awe of the doctors and nurses at Israel's Rabin Medical Center in the ER, ICU, and orthopedic departments as they respond to the October 7th atrocities. Please support our mission. Join our community of friends. Visit American Friends of Rabin Medical Center via our website and social media outlets on Twitter and Instagram, LinkedIn and YouTube, and on our Facebook page and discussion group. Today's Global Connections topic is October 7th, Survivor Stories and Trauma. Thank you to our very special guest, Lee Yaron, journalist at Haaretz newspaper and author of the new book 10/7, 100 Human Stories. Ruby Namdar, author of the book The Ruined House. And Dr. Michael Bahar, director of the Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation Department at Israel's Rabin Medical Center. And now, Global Connections with Robert Siegel.
Thank you, Josh. We frame today's panel with the themes of survival and trauma, two words that answer the same question. How has the experience of October 7th affected Israel and Israelis? Not just in terms of national politics or of Israel's relations with other countries, and not just in terms of the real dislocations that were brought about that day and in the broader war that followed. How does the experience of October 7th, 2023 operate on the level where we experience our own lives and our ties to others, family, friends, and strangers who are suddenly fellow passengers on the same trek? Our first guest is Lee Yaron. She's a journalist for the Israeli newspaper Haaretz and the author of the book 10/7, 100 Human Stories. 10/7 was recently named Jewish Book of the Year by the Jewish Book Council. It's a minutely well-reported series of linked stories from October 7th. Lee Yaron divides her time between Tel Aviv and New York City, and she's found some time for us during a time of a book tour to speak with us from New York. Welcome, Lee, to the program, and it's good to talk with you.
Thank you, Robert. It's an honor to speak with you.
It's been one of the side benefits for me of doing this that I got to read your book, which is terrific. Your beats have included being a welfare correspondent, covering the environment. When you spend time on this side of the ocean, you write a lot about Jews in New York. So how did the 10/7 book come about?
I started writing immediately after the massacre, 2 weeks after, in a time when I was overwhelmed with grief and anger, and mostly with the feeling that I want to do something for these victims. You know, I wanted to correct the injustice, but there's not much you can do. The only thing I could do was try to correct the record and tell their stories. In a way, I wanted to revive them, to make them live again, at least on paper. All the time that I was writing about welfare and the environment, I was always focused in stories of people on the margins of the Israeli society. if it's the elderly, Holocaust survivors, people living in poverty, the LGBTQ community. And covering these stories, time and again, I've seen how people in power who had no idea how these people actually lived were retelling and mis-telling their stories. And I came to understand then that if I want to reflect to my readers the real political story, I have to do it from the bottom up. That the real story always lies with the real people, not with the politicians, not with the generals.
Hmm.
And if you think about what happened since 10/7, we've been flooded with all of this information and misinformation and disinformation about Israel and this war that came to us mostly from the top down, from these people in power. So this book was my reaction and my attempt to reclaim the story of 10/7, to take it from these politicians and people in power and return it to the everyday people who suffered from it. So I wrote about 100 people, mothers and fathers and children, and I didn't want to define them solely as victims, but I wanted to know who they were and to write about their lives and their amazing communities and the histories of their families. So for months, I conducted hundreds of interviews with these bereaved families and with friends and first responders. And I asked them about these people's lives. So in the book, I'm weaving together the personal stories and histories with the larger political and historical picture. And I really want to honor and remember these people for who they were on the one hand, and on the other hand, just allow my readers to really understand the Israeli-Palestinian conflict from the hearts and from the homes of these everyday people, not through politicians that speak from above.
You had me from the first set of characters we meet. That group includes the Suiza sisters, age 6 and 2. I want you to just tell us briefly what these little girls experienced that day.
It's an incredible story. It's the first chapter of the book named Sderot, and it's a story about four families. One of them is the Suiza family, but there are other three, and we can even count a bit more families who never met these two little girls or their parents, but all of them decide to sacrifice so much and do everything in their power to try to save these two little girls. They were found covered in blood near a police station in the midst of the attack. Nobody knew who were their parents, how come they were left near the police station, what happened to them. They were crying. Police officer gave the two little girls to a man who was just going to the synagogue. He was 23. His name is Inon. He's a young father himself. His kid, I think, was 1 month or 2 months years old when 10/7 happened. And Inon is not asking any question. He's taking the two little girls and he runs back to his house and he takes care of them. I don't want to tell all the story, but there are many other people. Some of them are Jews, some of them are Arabs that we were introduced in this story and see, I think the story is a story of hope, even
Hmm.
though it's a difficult one, because it shows the most beautiful things in the Israeli society and in Israeli identity, which is the way that we come together, that everyone feels like this extended family, even if we're
Yeah,
strangers.
I certainly felt that the people who uh, had been presented with this pair of little girls and had never seen them before responded like they were long lost relations who had been who were in need of assistance, and it's very it's a remarkable tale. I wonder which struck you more in doing all this, how varied the many human stories were, or how similar they were at their core in some way.
It's a great question. I mean, I really wanted to capture the diversity of the Israeli society. I think too many people now, especially in international media, are looking at Israelis as this white one thing, as white colonizers, like not knowing our history well enough. And Israel is such a diverse country. So, beginning the writing process, I chose different stories, untold stories, for example, of Ukrainian refugees who fled to Israel from the Putin aggression, only to find themselves fleeing 1 year later from Hamas, and of the Bedouin population. People forget that 22% of Israel are Palestinian Israelis, Arab Israelis. They too fell victim to Hamas. People who are living in unrecognized villages in the Negev desert and the peace community. So many different communities. But yeah, their circumstances are different, but the grief is the same grief. And the way they try to help each other is, I saw it in many of these stories. But I think the stronger the community was, the process we're speaking today about resilience and trauma, I think that the healing I found was easier when they were from the kibbutzim, or they were from these communities who are really close.
I want you to talk about one group, which are the peaceniks. I mean, the people who lived close to Gaza were not a random selection of Israelis. There seemed to be a disproportionate number of people who felt pretty deeply invested in what's ever left of the peace process, and who, when times were better, had extensive dealings with people across the line in Gaza. And there were those who drove Palestinians to Israeli hospitals for medical support. Their world must be completely turned upside down by what's happened since October 7th.
Yeah, thank you, Robert, for speaking about it. So many people forget it. That so many ways Hamas murdered the Israeli peace community, or what was left out of the Israeli peace community after all of these years. I checked the voting roll of these people in the kibbutzim along the border. 94% of them voted for left-wing and center parties who supported a two-state solution and a Palestinian statehood. Like you say, they chose to live near the border because they believed in coexistence. You know, some of these people, for example, Kibbutz Be'eri. Kibbutz Be'eri is a socialist community. They were donating money to families in Gaza every month for over 20 years. They had friends there that they wanted to support. Some of the kibbutz members were driving the Palestinian kids to hospitals 2 days before they were murdered. So they were in the forefront of advocating for peace. And, you know, speaking with these families, they're destroyed. They're saying, we lost our family members, we lost our friends, we lost our homes. And in so many ways, we lost everything we believed in, because we believed in peace. There are different, you know, so many of them, and we see the numbers. I mean, Israelis since 10/7, in general, they turned to the right wing. If a decade ago, 60% of the Israelis said in polls they believe in a two-state solution, they believe in a Palestinian statehood, a month before the massacre, it was something like 50% of Israelis, and now we see it's about 25 to 35% of the Israelis who are saying we still believe in this idea of peace. People are in trauma and grief.
I read your book. I was very impressed, and to me, it places you latest in a noble line that for me began with Amos Elon back in for us in around 1970, a Haaretz writer who set out to tell American readers, certainly, Israel isn't the same country that Leon Uris wrote Exodus about. It's a much more complicated place than that, and it seems to me that you win the Amos Elon title for the 2020s. Thank you, and we'll be back later for the discussion period.
Thank you so much.
That's Lee Yaron. Our next panelist is a prominent Israeli novelist, Ruby Namdar. His novel, The Ruined House, is set in New York City, where Ruby lives and teaches. Like many Israelis who live in this country, and like many American Jews as well, he experienced October 7th, 2023 from afar, but that doesn't mean that he was spared any sense of trauma. Rudy Namdar, welcome to the...
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
A few months after 10/7, you told an interviewer for The Atlantic, actually, the thought of working on fiction feels beyond absurd to me right now. I don't have the bandwidth. Also, what could I possibly dream up as fiction that could top our reality? That was then. Is it still now?
Well, funny you should ask. I am, in many ways, yes. I am just trying to begin a new novel that I was working on laying the foundations for, and then the situation, hamatzav, as we call it, happened, and nothing has been the same since. And I have to tell you that I was actually uniquely apolitical in my public persona. Like everyone else, and like all Israelis, I have many opinions,
Mhm.
and they're all very, strong opinions. But I never politics and again the situation, as Israelis like to call it, when I was growing up, hamatzav, was never something I spoke about publicly. My writing had nothing to do with the politics and even the existential situation of Israeli society. And I was always drawn to a Hebrew and themes and the language that was not from here and now. This was my kind of signature as a writer. And then October 7th happened, and nothing was the same since. And now, a year and a half later, I am trying to return to fiction, and I find some comfort and solace in trying to imagine and hear voices and see sights and see the visions that bring that create fiction. But I did not have the bandwidth until very,
Mm.
very recently.
Yeah, I was going to interrupt and say, actually, you do in the Ruined House, you do write about Israel and Israeli leadership,
Yeah.
but it's the high priest in the temple in
Yes.
many centuries ago. So
Yes.
that's the Israel I read about.
Yeah. And also in The Ruined House, I think that was a book that was written when I first arrived in New York some 25 years ago. So I started working on this book a few years after my arrival. And at the center of the book stood my fascination with Jewish America and with New York and with America, but also with Jewish America and with American style Jewishness. I'm using the term Jewishness rather than Judaism.
Mhm.
That was so alien and fascinating to me that I wanted to write about it. And I found myself, by the way, while writing The Ruined House, referring to my protagonist, Andrew Cohen, the professor that's at the heart of the story, his first visit to Israel. And I surprised myself by what I wrote, that young Professor Cohen, not a professor then, was actually taken aback and a little alienated by the Israeli experience. He did not become a staunch Zionist. And years after I wrote this, um, I was not surprised, but yes, shocked by the level of alienation that so many American Jews, especially the young, feel towards Israel today. And that was a shocking revelation, to see that I managed to capture it in a book that was written a
Yeah.
while ago, and yet the seeds were theirs because I clearly saw something.
You're describing what you were surprised about in them, but you told me also that all of this revealed to you surprises that you saw in yourself, that
Yes,
your reaction to it all, stimulated by
yes,
October 7th.
yes. For me, I have to say that I feel that there's a double layer of trauma. It's not a competition. I mean, I'm sure that there's so many ways in which everyone, Israelis, Jews, and just people who have like a human soul, are traumatized by this atrocity, by this terrible crime against humanity that happened on October 7th. But I also had a chance to watch myself unravel in a way and reveal some identity structure that I was not as aware of, because until then, it kind of became my slot, my niche in Israeli literary culture. I was writing about the diaspora, mostly America, and I was telling its story in a way, because it is not a story that is told so much in Israel, and it is not a world that we Israelis know. And I say we Israelis, I've been living here for 25 years, mind you, Robert, and yet here I am. On October 7th, exactly, on October 7th, I felt such a visceral, deep, visceral shock, as if this happened not an ocean and a half away from me, because I was here in New York City at the banks of the Hudson River, not on the border of Gaza when this happened. But the level of trauma that I felt is forming inside me was as if it happened next block to me. And this was a very interesting feeling. I mean, at the time I didn't find it interesting. I just was reeling. I was just all shook up. Now, in hindsight, I just realized how different this might be had this happened here in America. Let's say that somewhere in Colorado there was a terrible thing. I think Americans would be shook up, but I think us Israelis, there's something about our sense of community and communitas, that sense of active, irrational, deep sense of solidarity that is the cohesive factor in Israeli culture, and that was challenged so badly over the last few years by the political unrest and by the whole fight over the juristic reform or revolution, depends how you want to call it. It was amazing to see how deep my solidarity was. How I felt that it could have been me, it could have been my daughters. It was actually me and my daughters. How it infiltrated my dreams. How every fiber in my body was altered by this trauma. So it wasn't like it happened to someone else or it happened elsewhere. It was as if it's happening here now. And
Yes, you just
I just want to complete. This was an interesting thing to experience, to realize how Israeli I am, actually, after 25 years of living here. I also realized that I'm more of a Zionist than I ever imagined I am. That I do actually, especially because of the great offense, the great attack on Israel and Zionism that followed immediately after on October 8th, before Israel has even launched the first act of retaliation or correction in Gaza, that huge surge of hatred and bias that we experience and are still experiencing actually made me much more of a Zionist than I ever imagined I was.
Ruby, there's much more I want to ask you, and we'll do that after after we hear from our next panelist. But please stick around for our discussion in a few moments. And thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We've been hearing about how Israelis are coping with the experience of October 7th and the war that followed it. And helping some Israelis do just that, cope, is our next guest's job. Last week, I had the opportunity to speak with a specialist in rehabilitation medicine at Rabin Medical Center. Dr. Michael Bahar is director of the Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation Unit at Rabin. And Dr. Bahar, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
To what degree have the events of the past year and a half or so affected the number of patients, the number of people you're seeing at Rabin?
Enormously. Rabin Medical Center had a crucial role in the response of Israel to the war, and we saw a very high number of war injuries and war casualties that arrived to be treated at the hospital. We're talking about around 1,200 soldiers who were injured during the war, who was treated at Rabin Medical Center at Petah Tikva as a total, and many of them proceed to rehabilitation services in the hospital as well, but definitely very significant and high numbers of casualties.
I wonder if you could tell us what types of treatment are typically given and what kind of specialized medical staff is on hand to give it.
Of course, as a rehabilitation department, the clinical approach is very multidisciplinary, and the medical staff, the specialized medical staff of the department includes PM&R specialists, doctors, nurses, a physical therapist, occupational therapist, speech therapist, a psychologist, social worker, nutritionalist, all work combined and together in order to achieve the functional goals and rehabilitation goals of the patients.
What are the most common injuries that you're treating?
The department treated mostly war injuries during this period, the year and a half that it's been working. And what we see most of all is war injuries. It includes blast injuries, shrapnel, gunshot wounds, traumatic brain injuries, and we see a lot of injuries from the emotional part on acute and post-traumatic stress disorders. It's a lot of the injuries that we see.
We read in the Times of Israel about a patient of yours being treated by your unit, that is a young soldier named Eitan. Do you know his story?
Of course, I know. I treated him for almost 3 months in the department. Eitan is an extraordinary and brave Israeli soldier, and he suffered a complicated injury, multi-trauma injury. I won't go into details, obviously, but he did a wonderful rehabilitation process. And I'm glad to share that he was discharged from the department 2 weeks ago, overall in a good condition. And it's been a real privilege to treat him. He's an amazing young man.
What when you say he's an amazing young man, what sticks with him?
He was one of the patients that had such a charisma and such a positive approach, even though he was, as I said, he had a complicated situation, medical situation, but his charisma and all this good vibe that he brought to the department actually influenced other patients other soldiers, other wounded soldiers in the department to go on and to do better in the rehabilitation process. It was really amazing to see.
It's not a common medical term, charisma, but it has an effect on patients surrounding him.
A lot. And we actually see our department is relatively small. We're talking about 14 inpatient beds. And you see the power of the group, of these soldiers who were injured, suffered different injuries, but working together to achieve the rehabilitation goal. And you see how they influence one another. It's really amazing to see. And I think it had a very positive effect on the rehabilitation process of these soldiers.
The American Friends of Rabin Medical Center, which produces this series of panels, donated an exoskeleton, obviously a synthetic exoskeleton that helps semi-paralyzed patients to walk. Can you tell us about the device and about Shachar, the first patient to actually use it?
Of course. Shachar was the first patient in Israel ever to receive the Rewalk device. It's as you said, it's an exoskeleton motoric device that enabled Shachar, that had a spinal cord injury and was paraplegic without the ability to move the lower limbs. He was able, with the rehabilitation process that he did in the department, where we trained him how to use the device, at the end, he was discharged about a week ago from the department after he achieved functional gait with the device, outside, ability to walk as any other person, and it was truly amazing to see.
You've announced a partnership with Rabin Medical Center's Innovation Lab that includes the application of artificial intelligence, or I assume the further application of artificial intelligence to rehabilitation. What kinds of applications do you hope to see just over the horizon?
Yeah, so we're actually already working on developing several AI instruments. We know that AI is in many senses the future of medicine and rehabilitation medicine in specific. And we're working on two main areas. One of them is the cognitive assessment level of patients. We will be able, with an AI instrument that we're developing, to organize all the various cognitive assessments that we're doing for the soldiers in order to achieve a better review of the cognitive situation. And another very interesting thing that is being developed is the ability to create, we create an AI assistant who is able to identify those who are at larger risk to develop post-traumatic stress disorder based on a chat with the patient. It's very exciting. It's very useful for the rehabilitation treatment, and we're working on it.
You know, there's a conversation, sometimes an argument that takes place in the United States about our Veterans Administration hospitals and the idea of special institutions that are for veterans. And those institutions, while they may have problems, are very often extremely popular with the veterans, who find the company of other veterans in treatment to be extremely important. And I just wonder, you have a small unit, but if you have all soldiers in there at any given time, is there some important unit cohesion that you experience?
As I said before, the power of the group of soldiers working together for the rehabilitation goals was very, very impressive, and it influenced a lot the functional outcomes of the patients treated in the department. We see it, they give each other strength. It's easier for them to communicate with people who suffered similar injuries and are facing the same kind of process with the difficulties, with all the various injuries that they suffered, and it gives them a lot of strength. And we see it in the positive results and the good results that we see in the rehabilitation processes in the unit.
And you've mentioned post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yes.
Is counseling and therapy, is that an important element to psychotherapy of what goes on?
It's in the center. It was in the center of our activity and treatment since day one. Okay, and we implemented a lot of different instruments and therapies in order to face this situation. We understood that these young soldiers who arrived to us, all of them suffered a major traumatic event. Okay, this injury is always very traumatic. So we first of all, we have a psychologist in-house in the department, and every patient is being treated. That's not the baseline care at the rehabilitation department, but in the rehabilitation department in Bellinson at Rabin Medical Center, all of them receive personal psychological treatment. We also implemented group therapy for the soldiers. We implemented virtual reality devices, okay, with dedicated programs of mindfulness and other therapies that were very useful. In all of them appear, a lot of them appear as acute stress disorder, and our main goal is to avoid the acute stress disorder to develop into PTSD, into post-traumatic stress disorder. Exactly. So virtual reality, and we work closely with the psychiatry wing of the military in order to give them the ongoing treatment after they're being discharged from the department.
I want to ask you just one last question that
yes,
it really doesn't relate to your specific role at the hospital, but just your life as an Israeli. As you said, it's not just the soldiers who have experienced traumatic, but the country has experienced a traumatic time. And I'm just wondering how you deal with the memory of that of those events from October, and are they still with you, those memories?
All the time. I think that all of us, all of the country went through something big, something that we will still need to process. It's obvious that we're still in the doing part of the response. We're very busy in the response, in the day-to-day work and activity. And I'm sure that the time will arrive that all of us will need to just have a little break and begin to process what we've been through. It's very complicated for sure.
Here's hoping.
Yeah.
Dr. Michael Bahar, Director of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation at Rabin Medical Center in Petah Tikva. Thank you very much for joining us for this recorded interview today.
Thank you, Robert, for having me. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
And still with me for this panel, live with us, are Ruby Namdar and Lee Yaron, two fine Israeli authors who are with us. And both of you have some divided life between the United States and Israel. Ruby, you've been living in New York for a long time now, 20, or as you would say, maybe not so long, just 25 years. And Lee Yaron, you spent half the year here and half the year in Tel Aviv. When you experience, and when you're a part of a country that has experienced a terrible trauma, would you rather be, I mean, would it be easier to deal with, or maybe it's never easy to deal with, but would it be better to be there in the company of people who are all experiencing it? Or does the distance make one feel safe and therefore in some way, an improvement? Lee, Yaron, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, it's such a difficult question. I think we're all traumatized by just living in Israel. I was a child during the Intifada. So, when I was a kid, I lost friends from my class, understanding what is death and what is terrorist, killing children when I was very young. I'm also the grandchild of Holocaust survivors. So I feel like, this trauma and this faith of being Jewish, being Israeli with the good things, but the bad things it's something that is so rooted in me. So sometimes, yes, I'm here now with this mission to promote this book and bring it to as much readers as possible. I've met more than 60 Jewish communities since October. And I'm speaking with people about these stories and a little bit of what we shared before. So I feel like, being here, speaking with these audiences, I have a more important role to do here than I would have in Israel. Because in Israel, I don't need to tell these stories. We'll leave the trauma, we'll leave the stories. Everyone lost someone. So maybe it's to relieve my own pain and grief. I need to feel like I have a mission and I have something useful to do with my time. And so for me now, being here and telling the stories is better in a way.
I couldn't leave everything and run to Israel, but that was what my instinct was. I definitely was very much seized by the urge to be there. And to the day, I feel that I would have been perhaps better, felt better, and have been more, maybe coped better with this trauma had I been able to be there at that time. I feel that being away, and yes, exactly, you pointed out that sense of safety. But that also, given what I told you before about that great sense of solidarity that Israelis have, that also causes a survivor's guilt. I wasn't raised to like save myself and be away while the collective is fighting for its life. I was raised to be part of a collective struggle to survive. So to not be there went against the very fiber of the way I was raised as an Israeli. It might be a generational thing, but for me, being here was actually very difficult, I must say.
Lee, I asked you earlier about the little Suiza sisters. There's somebody else I want to ask you about, and his town. And this is Chaim Rumi, whom you write about from, I guess it's the town of Ofakim. And you describe, well, you describe how he'd become religious and he'd taken charge of the funerals in the town before October 7th. And you write him what he said about how each family, each sect has its funeral customs, and he knew them all. and you tick them off of the Ethiopians who come in large numbers, but won't go near the body until the interment is finished, and the Tunisians who put the body in the opposite direction. I mean, this is not the Israel of a budding Middle Eastern Silicon Valley. It's a very different picture that we're getting.
Yeah, I mean, my family, my aunt and uncle live in Ofakim. So the story of this small port town is very close to my heart. Um, to give our viewers an understanding that the people of Ofakim are suffering from rockets from Gaza since the early 2000s for over 20 years. But they're so poor, they can't afford to have shelters in their homes like we have in Tel Aviv. So every time there's a rocket alarm, and sometimes it happens every week, every day, the people of Ofakim, they run out to the streets where they can find safety in the public shelter. And that morning of 10/7, these civilians ran out to the public shelter where 20 Hamas terrorists were waiting for them, ended up murdering 49 residents of Ofakim. So, connecting to what Ruby just said, this fear and this guilt and this feeling of my family is living there under rockets, under threat of terrorists was a lot. And when I was thinking and my family luckily survived because they stayed home that day, but they lost many, many people they loved. And when I was thinking how to write the story of Akim, I just heard about this man, about Chaim Rumi. He's the manager of the local cemetery. And, people were making jokes about him being such a good manager that they would say, he's running the city of dead of Ofakim, and it's a more beautiful and organized city from, the regular Ofakim, which is dirty and full with, people screaming and a lot of life. And Chaim was at the shul. He's now a religious man, and he was praying, and he just couldn't believe when the son of the Gabbai came and said, guys, you need to open your phones, you need to leave the shul, something is happening. They wouldn't believe him, and just thinking about this day through the eyes of religious Israelis, people who were, observing the Shabbat, and they didn't even know and understand. And Chaim refused to open his phone. He completed the prayer, they made it shorter, and he went home and he went to sleep like he does every Shabbat. And he was woken by the idea of telling him to go and open the cemetery and begin burying his friends and neighbors. And he was there for a few days without sleeping, opening bodies and saying, oh, I know this guy. He was just a child at my wife's kindergarten 20 years ago. And I know this guy from there. And, trying to help them and give them at least a decent burial was, his way to try and help. It's a heartbreaking story, but I think it tells us so much about Israel and the diversity and the people of Ofakim and all of these overlooked communities we don't hear about when we, read the coverage of Israel in the New York Times now.
Ruby, Lee just did something that we talked about, which is she made a joke in the context of this discussion. You would say something very Jewish, and indeed there are some people to cope find relief in gallows humor, and this is no different.
Yeah, it's very Israeli too. I mean, we all grew up with horrible humor. We grew up telling Holocaust jokes, war jokes, jokes about people who lost limbs in the army, in war and in the army. Every horrific aspect of Jewish and Israeli life at some point became a butt of a very, very bad and funny joke. I say bad because it's just so not American in many ways, because there's such a cultural difference here. I mean, if we told some of the things that the jokes and the remarks that we exchange sometimes in polite society here in New York, we would be sent to to a mental observation. But I even recently read about a dark comedy night, and I wonder if Lee would, I think you know it, that relatives and friends of people who were either kidnapped, murdered, or are in Gaza serving now got together for a night of terrible October 7 humor, where they told really, really funny and terrible jokes. And I heard interviews with them where they said, yes, this is our way of pushing back. This is our way of feeling agency, of not allowing the tragedy to own us. This is our way to own the tragedy. And I think that, Lee said early in the conversation, Lee said a simple but very important, very deep truth about Israel, that trauma is an inseparable part of our identity as a people. And therefore, so many things that are Israeli are basically coping mechanisms with trauma. And our humor is one of the most kind of transparent mechanisms.
Lee, were you familiar with the night of darkest humor?
I mean, I heard about a different show. Maybe there's a competition of two widows who are, one is a widow from the former Gaza war in 2014, and one is from now, and they're working together and sharing, jokes about their life as widows. But I think Ruby put it together so beautifully. It's true. It's part of our identity, and it takes us to this question of, was 10/7 part of Israeli history or part of Jewish history in this way? And in so many of these conversations I had with the bereaved families, the people they lost on 10/7 weren't the first people in their family to be murdered for being Jews. So many of them fled persecution in the former Soviet Union, in Arab countries, survivors of the Holocaust, people who came to Israel to establish kibbutzim, to build these communities with the dream of safety and Israel as the end of Jewish victimhood in this way. So when the fence was broken for so many people, it wasn't a physical barrier, but it was a dream of generations that was shattered. And I think that is something that is important to understand about the way Israelis feel 10/7 or experience 10/7.
What you've just said reminds me of something in the afterword to your book that your husband, Joshua Cohen, contributed. He uses the word homologizing, which he says is seeing in new events commonalities of structure or value or purpose of old events. To me, I was unfamiliar with the idea, but it reminds me a bit of the strange notion of Tisha B'Av, which is it commemorates the anniversary of two temples being destroyed, both on the same day, over a half a millennium difference. And what Joshua Cohen writes is that there's this process of finding similar patterns in the present and the past, turns the discipline of Jewish history into something religious, he writes, even mystical. And I just wonder if this is something that you heard from others. Lee, you were just talking about it. That, I mean, is there a dimension to, oh, this is happening to us because we're Jews? Here it is again. This time it's Sinwar. It used to be Hitler. It used to be Khmelnytsky. It used to be Haman. It used to be Pharaoh. This defines us. Do you find that reaction among Israelis, or are they more rooted in what's specific and unique to their own situation today?
Oh, Absolutely. I mean, for so many, it's like the reopening of this old trauma and these old memories. You know, when
Mhm.
Joshua is writing and afterward he's speaking about how Jewish time is repetitive, how through our holy days, through the cycle of the Torah reading, we're not actually leaving what's happening now. We are reliving it. It's reoccurring all the time, and I think there's a lot to it. And we kind of can separate the people who see 10/7 as part of Israeli history, as part of modern history, and something that is happening in reaction to modern events, and the people who see what happened as part of Jewish history through their reaction and what they see for the future. You know, if you think about 10/7 just as part of this new conflict or two, 75, 80 years conflict between Israelis and Palestinians, you can think about different ways to solve it. But if you think about it as part of Jewish history, it will never end. It always happens. There's always this Amalek, whether it's Hamas or, the Plishtim or other enemies to Am Yisrael, and we're just reliving this trauma.
Amalek,
Mhm.
the biblical enemy of the Hebrews as they're trying to get to Canaan. Ruby, thoughts about this issue of the
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with everything Lee said. I definitely feel and see it and hear it, the echo of this sentiment. I think as a culture, we are a culture that's hyper historical because Judaism and the Jewish people, Jewishness, have this strange element of being outside of history and very much inside history at every given moment. We have a hyper historical consciousness, and trauma is the organizing mechanism. And I actually want to say, not having spoken to the organizers of October 7, and not my assumption, or maybe it's my projection, that the people who designed this atrocious attack, I cannot but imagine that they knew what they were doing. That they're one of the effects that they tried to get and succeeded, I think, is to remind Israelis that we're Jews. Take us back to that helpless place of a minority. For one day, parts of Israel, but actually all of Israel, including us abroad, relived traumas that we heard about from grandparents of being a defenseless minority. The fact that this happened while we have a sovereign country and are boasting one of the strongest armies in the region and this like all-knowing intelligence and all that actually made it more monstrous, more scary, more traumatic. Because here we are with the fancy army and intelligence and Mossad and all the stories we tell ourselves that Jewish history ended with us. We are the new Jew. We are no longer at the mercy of a barbarous majority. And here we are. We were there. And if you want to go there, I would say that some would call it overreaction. I personally am not sure that it was an overreaction. The retaliation in Gaza was a came from this trauma, and it was meant to correct and compensate for those few hours where we were robbed of our sense of sovereignty and sense of being the new Jew, and were thrown back into that dreaded diasporic a helplessness.
there has been an observation by Hamas spokesmen over the years that the Jews of Israel love life more than any other people, which it sounds at first like a compliment. but it follows along to say, therefore, they're weaker than we are because we're prepared to face death, and a love of life and material existence is contradictory to that. I always found it a strange statement, but it's a strange conflict. Lee Yaron, any further thoughts on all of this?
Maybe to try and be optimistic when we're reaching the end of this conversation, and thinking about our love of life as something that can lead, to a different path. I mean, you were speaking at the Rabin Center, and half of the Israelis, and I'm included in this generation, are 30 years old or younger. And that means that we were born with or after the assassination of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, and in so many ways at the end of the era of hope for peace. I never lived in a time when there was real hope for peace, for the end of this conflict. I heard about it from my parents, but we were always told by our leaders that we will just live like this forever, and that technology and the Iron Dome will be enough to protect us and to give Israelis a good enough life in this endless wars and conflict. And we spoke about it. I know that Israelis are now turning to the right, and I understand it. And so many of us are in grief and in pain. But I see the young people who are coming back from this war, and they are destroyed. And so many of them are speaking about not wanting their kids to experience that, and about the prices of a horrible war. So I remember the words of Rabin when he came to sign the Oslo Accords. He said, I come here today as a soldier. I come from the country where parents bury their children. And as a soldier, I say, enough with the tears, enough with the blood. And my hope is that my generation that was not part of this process will end and will find a solution from our love of life and from our love of Israel.
Ruby Namdar, I give you the last word.
Again, I agree with Lee completely, as I often do. I want to also point out that having, for example, listened to Dr. Bahar, this remarkable man, and devoted to innovation in the service of life, I want to say, yes, maybe there are moments where the despise for human life gives our enemies like a momentary advantage. But I believe that actually in the long run, the fact that Judaism is the cult of life, our belief in life, our hope, our caring about human life, caring about everyone that needs help in surviving and thriving, is a great source of power. I believe it kept us until now, and I believe it will give us strength to continue and survive.
Well, I'd like to thank all of our guests, Ruby Namdar, Lee Yaron, and Dr. Michael Bahar, whom we heard from earlier. And many thanks also to Joshua Plout and Ronnie Giuliano from American Friends of Rabin Medical Center, which produces Global Connections, and to our technical director, Bobby Grandone. Our program sponsor is the American Friends of Rabin Medical Center. It's a 501c3 national charitable organization that represents in the U.S. Israel's largest hospital, Rabin Medical Center in Petach Tikva, in Greater Tel Aviv. The website is www.afrmc.org. I'm Robert Siegel, and this has been Global Connections, Navigating the New Normal. See you next month. Stay healthy and stay safe.